Can hiring the right attorney pay for itself? You might have seen billboards across Texas that say things like, a DWI can cost you $17,000. Is that true? Well, it depends on a number of things, including the attorney that you hire. Could a DWI cost you $17,000? It could. Could it cost you a lot less? Yes. Could it cost you a lot more? Absolutely it could. So let's break down the costs associated with a DWI in Texas and why hiring the right attorney might actually save you money in the long term. Attorneys' fees vary on DWIs. A DWI, first-time misdemeanor offense, might cost you $5,000 in attorney's fees. It might cost you $10,000 in attorney's fees. And that's pretrial, not even including a jury trial. So how could you potentially save that money during the course of a DWI case against you? Let's start to look at all the costs associated with a driving while intoxicated charge. First, you're going to have to bond out of jail. That could cost you nothing if the judge releases you on personal recognizance, but it could cost you thousands of dollars if a monetary bond is required and if you pay a cash bond. Next, if your vehicle was towed, you're going to have to go to the tow yard. You're going to have to pay for the storage of the vehicle as well as the tow of the vehicle. That might be a few $100s. Next, if you're alleged to have a BAC or a blood alcohol concentration of a 0.15 or greater, so nearly double the legal limit, or if this is a second, third, or subsequent offense, the judge is going to impose an interlock device or an ignition interlock device on your vehicle. Now you're going to pay $100, $150 to have that installed and $60 or $75 a month to keep that on. You might have to report to pretrial services and pay a fee to pretrial services while your case is pending. Now notice that everything I've talked about so far applies before your case has been resolved. You're presumed innocent, and yet you're bonding out, you're paying money to a tow yard, you're paying money to an interlock company, you're paying for pretrial services potentially, and this goes on month after month, however long this case is pending, and that starts to add up. You might also start doing some things that your attorney recommends that you do. So for example, I would recommend in most cases that you take a driving while intoxicated education class, that you take the substance abuse evaluation, that you complete a victim impact panel. All of those things are going to cost money, probably a total of a few $100s. You are also potentially going to be taking either your personal time or time off work to volunteer somewhere, to do some community service, all in terms of creating mitigation evidence for a prosecutor to someday consider. If you enter a plea to your DWI, whether that's for probation, deferred adjudication, or jail time, there will be additional costs associated. That will also be the case if you're found guilty of driving while intoxicated. First, there will be court costs associated with the plea or finding of guilt. That's typically $300 or $350. You will then have a fine associated with either the plea or the finding of guilt. Those fines vary based on what you've pled to. So for example, on a first-time Class B misdemeanor DWI, your fine is up to $2,000. If you're alleged to have that BAC of 0.15 or greater, then it's up to $4,000. If it's a second offense, it's up to $4,000. If it's a third or greater offense, it's up to $10,000. All felonies, so whether that's DWI with a child passenger, intoxication manslaughter, intoxication assault, all of those carry a fine of up to $10,000. If you're placed on probation or deferred, there will be a monthly supervision fee of potentially $60 a month, sometimes higher. If the judge orders that you have interlock, you will have to maintain that interlock for at least half the length of your probation. That cost continues. If you do jail time as a result of a driving while intoxicated charge, there is an additional administrative fee. We used to call these surcharges. They've been replaced with a new administrative fee. That can be on a first-time DWI, $1,000 a year for 3 years, or $3,000. If you start talking about Class A misdemeanors or second offenses, that goes up to $1,500 a year and even $2,000 a year for subsequent offenses. And those fees add up over time. Finally, the issues that arise with your driver's license also create financial consequences. There is typically an ALR hearing, or an administrative license revocation hearing. That's going to cost money. It's sometimes included in your criminal fee. It's sometimes a separate fee. There will be a fee for an occupational license, which gives you permission to drive, to do all the things that you need to do that Texas really doesn't have public transportation for, if the judge rules in favor of DPS at the ALR hearing. Typically, the ALR hearing and the occupational license will cost you a total of about $1,500. If you try to go get your license reinstated, that's another $125 that you're paying to DPS just to get your license back at the end of the suspension period. So between attorney's fees and all the other fees that I've discussed, a DWI in Texas could certainly cost you $17,000 or more, but it doesn't have to. And here's why hiring the right attorney makes so much sense. Reducing the financial costs associated with the DWI is one of our goals. We can do this by negotiating with the prosecutor to reduce the fines considerably. So instead of thousands of dollars, you might be subject to hundreds of dollars. There are even instances where we convince a prosecutor not to impose a fine at all. Some things can't be changed, like the $300 or $350 that are associated with the court. Those court costs can't be waived. There are, however, things that we can do to potentially reduce probation fees. To convince a judge that Interlock should not apply for the length of your probation, but instead only for half of your probation. Similarly, there are many instances where I've been able to convince a judge to not put a person on reporting probation and instead put them on Proforma probation. This simply means they're not reporting to anyone, they're not completing classes or conditions, and instead all they have to do is stay out of trouble. That means you don't have to pay for additional classes and courses, and you don't have to pay a monthly supervision fee to probation. Hiring the right driving while intoxicated attorney can be an expensive proposition, but understand that hiring the right attorney also means we will do everything humanly possible to reduce all the repercussions that you have to face, including those financial repercussions. If you've been charged with driving while intoxicated in North Texas, reach out to us at 817-203-2220.